Agatha Christie wrote a total of 66 mystery novels, 14 short story collections, and several original stage and radio plays, so it's no surprise that there are hundreds of film, TV, stage, radio, and even video game adaptations of her work. However, many of her best works remain relatively unknown, even those that have been adapted more than once. Today I want to take two adaptations of the same book and have them compare them in terms of quality and accuracy, and decide which one is superior. Because, everything's more fun when it's a competition. Mrs. McGinty's Dead, also titled Blood Will Tell, was first published in 1952. It was the 24th novel to feature Hercule Poirot, Christie's primary fictional detective, who you might know from Murder on the Orient Express and the upcoming Death on the Nile. The two adaptations we'll be looking at are the 1964 feature film retitled Murder Most Foul, and the 2008 version starring David Suchet, as part of the TV series Agatha Christie's Poirot. Technically, there's also a French adaptation in the series Les Petits Meurtres d'Agatha Christie, which I've never been impressed by, so we're going to ignore that forever and ever. We'll start by comparing the David Suchet version to its source material. As before, spoiler warning for anyone who doesn't know the solution to the mystery. So in the book, Poirot is visited at his London flat by his friend, Superintendent Spence, who first appeared in the previous Poirot novel. Not long ago, Spence arrested a man named James Bentley for the murder of his landlady, Mrs. McGinty. Today, Bentley was convicted and is waiting to be executed. Spence is concerned because, despite all the evidence, he feels in his gut that Bentley is innocent.
So according to the law, this James Bentley, he has nothing to complain of.
If he's hanged for something he didn't do, he's got something to complain of.
Poirot agrees to look into it. He interviews James Bentley, then goes to the village where the murder took place. At first, he doesn't come across any clues the police haven't already uncovered, though he's intrigued that the murder weapon was never found. Out of all the people Poirot interviews, only one believes Bentley is innocent, a co-worker who likes him, named Maud Williams. She says she'll help Poirot if she can. Poirot is disappointed that he hasn't found any leads, until he learns Mrs. McGinty bought a bottle of ink.
A bottle of ink?
Expect she wanted to write a letter, don't you?
Mrs. McGinty never wrote letters to anyone, but apparently she wrote one just 2 days before her death. This leads to the discovery that she'd recognized an old photograph in a magazine and intended to make money from it somehow. This means someone in her village might have killed her to stop her from exposing a secret from their past. Bentley is no longer the only suspect. Okay, now let's look at the adaptation. It starts out... Actually, everything in the film very nearly follows the book. The character Joe Birch is a lot more hostile, and some events are a little out of order, but other than that, it's pretty much spot on. So, moving on, I guess. The photo Mrs. McGinty recognized must be one of 4, each one showing a woman with a tragic, violent past. That woman, or someone connected with her, is likely in the village. Poirot interviews the people Mrs. McGinty worked for as a cleaning lady, in whose homes she might have seen the photograph. We meet Maureen Summerhays and her husband, the Colonel, who run the guest house where Poirot is staying, Dr. Rendell, his wife Sheila, Guy and Eve Carpenter, Mr. and Mrs. Weatherby, their stepdaughter Deirdre, Laura Upward, and her son Robin, a playwright who's writing a stage play based on a mystery novel by a very famous author. Now, in the vast majority of early Poirot stories, Captain Hastings played Dr. Watson to Poirot's Sherlock Holmes. After he stopped appearing, that position was pretty much left vacant, but toward the end of the series it was filled by a character based on Agatha Christie herself, Ariadne Oliver. Mrs. Oliver loves apples, is embarrassed by praise, and whenever Poirot is stumped, she helps by throwing out ludicrous, convoluted theories. She writes murder mysteries starring a Finnish detective.
Why a Finn?
I've often wondered.
In the TV series, she's played by Zoe Wanamaker, who you might know from Harry Potter and Doctor Who. I could do a whole video on the parallels between Mrs. Oliver and Agatha Christie. Anyway, Poirot starts to worry this might all be a mare's nest, but then someone tries to push him under a train.
Superintendent, I have some very good news for you. No. It is that someone has attempted to kill me.
Now he knows he's on the right track. Up to this point, the film is still just about the same. It leaves out Deirdre and the Weatherbys, and the magazine article features 2 women instead of 4. Eva Kane, who murdered her lover's wife, and Lily Gamble, the child who killed her aunt, with the same type of weapon that killed Mrs. McGinty. Meanwhile,
we must have some sexual tension between Sven and Ingrid. You know how it is.
Sven Hexen never cared for women.
What? Oh, no, Ariadne, you can't make him a pansy. I mean, he's an outdoor sort of chap. He skis.
He does not ski. He's 60.
Mrs. Oliver is fed up with Robin, so she escapes and helps Poirot with his investigation. She tells him Dr. Rendell is the killer, based on her intuition.
It's him. I've had a look at everybody, and it's him. It's always the doctor.
When Poirot tells her about the attempt on his life, Mrs. Oliver says the Upwards have alibis, as she was with them at the time. A party is held in honor of the 2 celebrity visitors. We're given hints that Maureen, Sheila, Eve, and Deirdre all had tragic pasts, Maureen especially, when she drunkenly complains about having been put up for adoption.
I was adopted. I had every advantage. It's always hurt. Really sodding hurt. To know that my mother didn't want me.
She says to Robin Upward, "I don't like being adopted, do you?" On an impulse, Poirot shows the photographs to the suspects and watches their reactions carefully. Mrs. Upward is the only one who clearly recognizes one of them. She says she's seen the photo of Lily Gamble, but can't remember where. Poirot warns her not to withhold information. It could put her in mortal danger. The next day, Poirot is floored to discover the murder weapon, a sugar hammer, amongst the junk in Maureen's house. He enlists the help of Maud Williams in tracing where the hammer came from. As she does so, we're given strong hints that she's, well, scary. Then, on a night when Robin Upward and Mrs. Oliver go to the theater, Mrs. Upward is murdered. Once again, looking at the adaptation, everything matches up perfectly, except one significant detail, which I'm not going to reveal just yet. James Bentley's execution is postponed during the investigation of the new murder. It's gradually uncovered that Mrs. Upward invited 3 women to her home on the fateful night: Sheila, Eve, and Deirdre. 2 of them say they didn't go, and Deirdre says no one answered when she knocked. There's also a suspenseful sequence where a teen girl claims to have witnessed the murderer, a woman, go into Mrs. Upward's house. One of the suspects drives off with the girl in his car, ostensibly to go to the police, but there's a vague implication he's going to murder her somewhere in the woods. But it turns out she's fine. Meanwhile, Poirot deduces that since no one would have any reason to keep the photo of Lily Gamble, neither Mrs. McGinty nor Mrs. Upward could have come across it in the village. Therefore, Mrs. Upward was lying. It was a different photo she recognized. Soon the police find evidence that the woman was Eva Kane, the pregnant murderess who was acquitted and left the country, ostensibly to give her daughter Evelyn a better life. When Poirot discovers a certain photograph in Maureen's guest house, everything starts to fall into place. So, as I've said, the film's events very nearly match those of the book. The functions of Deirdre and the Weatherbys are taken over by the other characters. For example, it's Maureen who knocks on Mrs. Upward's door and gets no answer. The situation with the teenage girl is simplified, though it still involves a witness who's afraid to come forward because it might expose her affair with a married man. Let's see how close the conclusion is to the source material. The solution is about to be revealed, so final spoiler warning. In both the book and the film version, Poirot explains how he deduced that the scene of Mrs. Upward's murder was staged, that Mrs. Upward was dead before the 3 women were even invited, that Robin Upward was adopted, that Eva Kane's daughter Evelyn was actually her son, and that that son was Robin. Robin knew that if Mrs. McGinty told Mrs. Upward he was the son of a murderer, she'd disown him. So he murdered Mrs. McGinty and framed James Bentley. When Mrs. Upward found out anyway, he killed her to inherit her money before she could do anything. He planted the photo of his mother, Eva, in Maureen's house to implicate her. There's little actual evidence to point to Robin, so Poirot tricks him into confessing. He pretends as if he's fallen for the frame-up, but then he exposes it, saying it was clumsy. He even pretends to attack Robin with the sugar hammer, frightening him. At least, that's what happens in the book. In the film...
Is that not so?
Yeah.
So, a little more melodramatic? We'll talk more about that later. There are two loose ends left over that Poirot ties up. First, it was Maud who was seen going into Mrs. Upward's house. Maud is actually the daughter of the woman Eva killed, and she thought Mrs. Upward was Eva. She went there, maybe to murder her, but she found the woman dead. As for the person who pushed Poirot at the train station, that was Dr. Rendell, who apparently has a criminal past, although in the film they switch it to Mrs. Rendell, who does it to protect her husband because she thinks Poirot is after him. Now that the case is over, Poirot decides to stave off boredom by setting up Bentley with Deirdre. In the film, this is left out, and Bentley ends up with Maud. Alright, now let's take a look at the other adaptation, 1964's Murder Most Foul, which Agatha Christie once said would be a horrible title for a story. It starts out with Mrs. McGinty's murder. Oh, here's our first big difference right here. She's strangled instead of bludgeoned to death. Okay, then we have the trial, and here's where they introduce the detective, who in this version is a member of the jury. Except, wait, that's not Poirot. They took Poirot out of his own story? What? Who is this imposter? Well, as a matter of fact, Poirot's replacement is none other than Agatha Christie's second most well-known investigator, Miss Jane Marple. Miss Marple was introduced in 1927. She appears in 12 novels and 20 short stories. She's frequently characterized as a very old woman whom people tend not to notice, but is extremely sharp and observant. When Margaret Rutherford was cast as Miss Marple in a series of 4 films in the 1960s, of which Murder Most Foul is the third, Agatha Christie proclaimed her totally unsuitable for the role, but admired Rutherford as an actress. She even dedicated one of her later Miss Marple novels to her. This contrast between book Miss Marple and film Miss Marple is well represented in the farce film Murder by Death, where one character assumes this old lady is the venerable detective, when in fact it's this woman. So, Miss Marple is on the jury in the trial of James Bentley, and she's the only one who won't vote guilty, resulting in a hung jury.
If ever there was an open and shut case, this was it. One member of that jury was being deliberately perverse.
Many more than one, Inspector, I assure you.
Oh?
11, to be precise.
She decides to investigate the mystery herself, and discovers a blackmail message written by Mrs. McGinty to someone in the theater troupe, the Cosgood Players. Miss Marple manages to get herself hired to join the troupe so she can... Oh! Okay, looks like we have another murder already. This guy's been poisoned. Who is this guy? Oh, yeah, we saw him earlier for about 2 seconds. He was a jerk. What was his name? George? We'll say George. All of the suspects are different from the ones in the book, though one is named Sheila Upward. Interesting. The others are Bill, Arthur, Eva, Ralph, Maureen, Driffold, and this lady, whose name I can't remember. Hopefully she's not important. The police think George might have committed suicide, but the actors in the troupe don't agree.
One of us is a murderer. And you feel that too, don't you?
Well, my dear, it's hardly for me to say.
And then one of them confesses.
You know it was me. You and your insinuations and your stupid sarcasm.
What do you mean? What are you talking about?
Well, I'm going to finish you. I'm going to close your big mouth once and for all. No!
But it turns out to be a practical joke. Miss Marple figures out that McGinty's blackmail scheme was connected with a particular stage production from 13 years ago, but none of the Cosgood players was involved in that, except Mr. Cosgood, who wrote the play. Miss Marple decides to let slip that she's onto the murderer, hoping to provoke him into incriminating himself.
You see, Mrs. McGinty's dead.
That night, she discovers a third murder victim. It's... oh, crap. So we're close to the end of the movie, and so far it has barely anything in common with the book. It turns out the third murder attempt was meant for Miss Marple, but the other woman got in the way. Finally, Miss Marple learns about Eva Kane. Well, she's called Rose Kane in this version, who was hanged for a murder she committed during that infamous stage production, and she'd had a child named Evelyn. It seems like Eva is about to be revealed as the murderer, but it turns out it's really... oh god. Is it Bill? Yeah, Bill, I think. It's the guy who confessed to the murder as a joke, except he really did do it. That's a clever twist, I guess. He was engaged to Sheila Upward, but he was afraid she'd break it off if she found out he was the son of a murderer. So, similar motive to Robin. And like Robin, Ms. Kane was his mother. He's Evelyn. Mrs. McGinty blackmailed him, and he stole money from George to pay her off. That's why he had to kill George. This is what's called a loose adaptation. I don't think I've ever seen a pair of them at such opposite extremes. One that strictly follows the original storyline, and one that uses just barely enough of the source material to still count as an adaptation. There's certainly some irony in a loose adaptation of a story in which a character, based on the author, complains about her book being loosely adapted. Whew. So, which one is the better film? Well, yeah, no, I'm not going to beat about the bush. It's the Miss Marple film, hands down. Despite the fact that the story and characters are a bit confusing, and there's really no way for the audience to deduce the solution, this movie, like all the Rutherford films, is fun.
Well, Inspector, since you are clearly alleging that I am a tittle-tattling busybody, I will bid you good day. Come, Mr. Stringer.
Oh my god, she is awesome.
Well, I've done some riding in my time, you know.
Oh?
Junior Silver Spurs, Brockbrook, 1910. I warn you, I was ladies' national fencing champion in 1931. I should warn you, I won the ladies' small arms championship at Bisley in 1924.
Bully for you.
These are all movies you want to watch again and again. This one? This is proof that just because an adaptation is accurate to the book, it doesn't necessarily make it good. Mrs. McGinty's Dead is one of my 3 favorite Agatha Christie books, mainly because it's funny. It's hilarious. I love the scenes with Poirot in the fraction of a star hotel, and Mrs. Oliver battling to keep her detective from turning into basically James Bond. And those parts are in the film, but somehow the filmmakers managed to make them bland. Okay, I admit, I did laugh at Zoe Wanamaker's scenes, because Zoe Wanamaker, but my favorite scene, the one where Poirot first meets Maureen, that was just gross. Furthermore, all the suspects feel like cardboard, which is a cardinal sin in an Agatha Christie film. Loyalty to the book means nothing if you're not going to tell the story in an engaging way. Then again, was this adaptation really that loyal? In the book, the important clue that led Poirot to Robin's secret was Maureen's line spoken to Robin, "I don't like being adopted. Do you?" It's one of many clues that points you directly to the solution which Agatha Christie dangles in front of our eyes, to which we remain oblivious until the end. But in the movie...
Just be thankful someone took you in, darling. It's cold out there.
Really? That's supposed to bring Poirot his epiphany? That is neither subtle nor clever, and even though they keep Poirot's reference to a secret polichinelle, a secret that everyone thinks you know already so no one tells you, it doesn't make any sense because nobody in this version actually knows the secret. One aspect of Robin's character that survived to the screen was that he wouldn't mind people knowing he's the son of a murderer.
Mightn't her son kill Mrs. McGinty for the sake of his mother's reputation?
No. I think he might use it for publicity for one of his plays.
Exactly! The only reason he tries to hide this secret is that he doesn't want his cushy lifestyle taken away. His motive is privilege, not pride or shame. In the end, we're meant to laugh at him. Despite being a murderer, he's not that scary after all. The whole point is that he's a coward. This...
Don't look at me. Please! Don't look at me!
...is not something you can laugh at. It's inconsistent and unsatisfying. Maybe this kind of climax works for some people, but not for me. So, bottom line, if you're interested in Mrs. McGinty's Dead, go read the book, because neither of these films is a good adaptation. But the Margaret Rutherford movies are fantastic, and you should give those a watch at some point. If there are any Agatha Christie's you want to see me cover, please say so in the comments. Until next time, I bid you good day.